there. Are we ready to get started? Gina, give me the sign that we're starting, yes?
Yeah, we're starting. We have 15 participants already, and it's just climbing up there. I see it.
Right. Should we give it, maybe we'll give it 2 minutes. Make sure that we are recording this, but that everybody knows that nobody's comments or anything can be seen by anybody else, so your privacy is protected. Gina, give me a little sign when you want to start.
Numbers are still climbing, but yeah, I think we can go ahead and start.
Okay. So we'll start with just our welcome. So welcome to the third webinar in our series of 5 about embryo donation. Today, we're going to be exploring different ways to talk to children about embryo donation. This is an important topic, and we're just going to be scratching the surface here today. One of the missions of our organization, Empower, is to continue to create educational materials and tools that will support long-term family functioning, especially as it relates to parenting and donor conception. While we're focused on embryo donation, of course, much of this talk can also be applied to families who've worked with an egg or sperm donor or both, which is sometimes called double donor or donor-donor. And we separated this presentation today into 2 sections specific to the children of embryo recipients and then the children of embryo donors. But we really hope everyone stays to hear both parts of today's presentation because we think there's information that can be important and relevant to both sides. So I will introduce myself. So here's a little compilation of all that is me over the last decade. I'm Maya. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I primarily work with fertility patients and those creating a family in alternative ways. I also produced a film with my husband called One More Shot that documents our tumultuous journey to parenthood, which is now available on Vimeo on demand. The end of that film and the end of our journey was the birth of our daughter, now almost 6, who was conceived via embryo donation. So for today's webinar, I'm going to start with some thoughts about talking to donor-conceived children, the children of recipients. And I'll talk more generally about how to talk to children conceived via embryo donation, but I'll also share some of the ways I've navigated this conversation with my daughter over the past few years.
I'm Gina. I'm a genetic counselor in the field of reproductive medicine. So that means I help people understand the meaning of genetic testing options and test results or genetic risks that might be present in their families. I had been working in the field of infertility for 6 years before trying to start my own family and realizing it would be more difficult than we had hoped. My husband and I ended up going through our own fertility journey for 3.5 years, finally conceiving our son via IVF. And our story didn't really stop there. We actually got pregnant naturally, shockingly, when he was about 2, but we lost the baby at 13 weeks. Eager to have another baby, we transferred another of our embryos about a year later. And despite a very touch and go pregnancy at the very beginning, our daughter was born. I felt pretty certain our family was done right away, but we held off on making any final decisions about our embryos until our daughter was about 2 years old. In the meantime, speaking to fertility patients every day, there only seemed to be one option for me when it came to our remaining embryos. We knew there would be amazing parents out there for them somewhere. And we ended up donating half of the remaining embryos to a family member, kind of a surprise at first. Now they have an adorable 2-year-old little girl. And our second recipients, people we met via Facebook, are in the midst of transfers, and I'm sending lots of baby dust their way. I'll talk later about how we talk about these relationships and our decision to donate with our kids. And I'll give some tips about talking about DNA and genes and what it means to be related to other people.
Sorry, it took me a second there with my mute button. Hi, everyone, I'm Jen. My fertility journey started in about 2006 when I thought I could easily get pregnant the old-fashioned way. However, after a year of trying, my husband and I were diagnosed with male factor infertility. We went through a series of interventions, including everything from acupuncture to varicocele surgery, before we landed on IVF as our best shot at becoming parents. The first round of IVF ended in miscarriage and no frozen embryos. The second round, however, ended with the birth of our twins in 2012 and 1 frozen embryo. I sat on the decision of what to do with that embryo until my twins were about 3.5. After years of paying storage bills and a lot of deep conversations with my husband, we decided to donate. One of the main reasons we chose to donate is because I really wanted to give back to someone who had found themselves in a similar situation of infertility and or miscarriage. What resulted from my one frozen embryo is a boy who is now 4 years old and lives with his mom across the country from me. I'll get into more details a little bit later about our relationship and how I've talked with my children about him. Along my donation journey, I didn't find much support out there for embryo donors, so I started my own website, which is embryodonationsupport.com, to create a community of education and support. I began running support groups for embryo donors, and a few years later, I met Maya and Gina, and we created Empower. So the three of us, as you know by now, are co-founders of Empower, which is an organization that's dedicated to providing education and support to those interested in embryo donation. And as you just heard in our intros, the thing that makes us unique is that we're not only professionally connected to embryo donation, but clearly we're also very personally connected. Before we delve into more content of the webinar, I want to let you know that we've done 2 previous webinars that may interest you. There was one called Embryo Donation, the Next Generation, and Embryo Donation, a Spectrum of Relationship Options. They're both available on our website at empowerdonation.com/webinars. We've received some feedback from our past webinars that we need to give a little bit more time for some of these big topics. So today's presentation will be approximately 90 minutes, and we've saved time for questions at the end. Maya is going to begin about talking about how embryo recipients can talk to their children about their unique beginnings, and then Gina and I will cover talking to children of embryo donors. If you have any questions or comments along the way, you can type them in the chat, and remember, only we see them because we want to protect your privacy.
I also wanted to add that we're recording this webinar, so if in case you can't stay for the whole thing or you want to catch it again later, we will have it available on our website, and we'll send you a link after the webinar. But you know, as well, it will be a little bit longer today. But I want to tell you a little bit about Moxie. So Empower with Moxie, we have a lot of exciting things we're getting ready to launch. We have an education platform coming soon dedicated solely to embryo donation called Moxie Education, as well as an open matching platform for donors and recipients called Moxie Matching. 2 more webinars coming up, support groups, funded genetic counseling for embryo donation matches, a podcast, and a lot more content and events around embryo donation. So if you'd like more info on any of these things, please go to our website and sign up to stay connected.
And I'm looking at all that going, no wonder my hair is turning gray at the top. So we'll get started with talking to children conceived via embryo donation. So I'm really wearing multiple hats today, and because of that, I have several perspectives that I share from. One is my professional perspective as a psychotherapist. Another perspective is that of a mother of a donor-conceived child. And really beneath both of those identities is my experience as a fertility patient who just felt very broken for many years. So I come here with these multiple lenses with hope that I can do my best as a professional to share best practices for talking with children about donor conception, and my best as a mother to share the actual physical experience of having these conversations, while also remembering the fertility patient who's come to the table with past wounds that can sometimes be triggered. I want to say that my experiences are uniquely my own and are only meant to illustrate and share an example of how I've been moving through this process. I also want to acknowledge that all of this is really just a framework or a jumping off point for families, and we understand that every family has unique cultural perspectives that of course must be considered. The goal of today is to help you start the conversation with yourself and your partner if there is one, so you can gain confidence and tools to start talking with your child about donor conception. So we'll start with, itchy nose. We'll start with the why. Here's a short list of the top 5 reasons why it's important to tell. So kids have a right to know about their genetic origins. Secrets in a family can create a sense of shame. DNA testing makes anonymity impossible. Your children don't share your genetic medical history, and that might be important to know. And it also can be important for children to know about their genetic connections. So I start with the why in case anyone out there has ever had the thought that maybe they don't need to tell their child because they think it isn't necessary, or they worry it will be confusing or cause distance between them and their child. At Empower, we want to provide information and obviously empower people to make the best decisions they can for themselves and their families. But we also believe that telling a donor-conceived child their genetic truth is important. For people with known donors, this may feel easier, but not knowing your donors doesn't mean it has to be difficult. It's a slightly different conversation, perhaps, because there's some information that you won't have. Not having certain identifying information, though, should not prevent you from being able to tell your child. You can share what you know and join them in curiosity for what you don't know. And I'm going to start by sharing a couple quotes that we really connect to. So this is a quote from a new book by Susan Gollenbuch. And Susan Gollenbuch is one of the world's leading researchers on new family forms. And so this quote reads, "It seems that embryo donation is shrouded in even greater secrecy than egg or sperm donation because the children lack a genetic connection to two parents instead of one. Parents fear that both of them will be rejected if the children find out, and the children may never be able to discover the identity of either of their genetic parents." So that's from her new book, We Are Family. And it really seems like fear and fear of the unknown reaction of children is what holds parents back from sharing, as well as perhaps not knowing exactly how to share. So hopefully after today's webinar, both of these unknowns will feel less intense. We interviewed Susan for our blog, and I wanted to share her response to us asking about this particular quote. So she said, "We found no evidence of parents being rejected by donor-conceived children in families where the children were told about their conception when they were young. The studies that have reported rejection have focused on donor-conceived people who don't find out about their origins until they were teenagers or adults." So I'm trying to balance a variety of things. One is the needs or potential needs of the donor-conceived child or person, and the other is the experience of the parents. And because I understand that experience, I have a strong desire to help parents eliminate any sense of shame or fear that their path to parenthood may have created, and shift it to a sense of pride and confidence in how their family came to be, so that wanting to keep secrets from children isn't even a consideration. Wanting for some things to be private is absolutely valid, but feeling the need to keep secrets within a family usually only creates challenges. Privacy and secrecy are very different things. So there are two more quotes that I wanted to share that stress the value of starting the conversation early. This is another one from We Are Family, Susan Gollenbuch's new book. And it's, "Children who were told about their conception in their preschool years accepted this information. Some showed little interest and others were curious, but not one child was distressed." And then this next quote is from a 2020 study conducted by We Are Donor Conceived, which is an online resource and community for donor conceived people. So the quote reads, "Respondents who learned they are donor conceived prior to age 3 were significantly more likely to categorize their overall experience as positive compared to those who found out after age 3. Talking about the special way your child was conceived or the special way your family came together can be shared when the child's an infant. I wouldn't expect any deep conversation around that time though, but it's the starting point. We tell and read stories to our kids all the time. Telling them the story of how you became a family can be one of those stories. It normalizes their origins and allows it to just be part of them from the very beginning. And I know that some people might be coming here today with kids who are a bit older, and I don't want anyone to freak out. It's never too late to tell. It's a different conversation. And I'll talk a little bit about talking to older kids in a few minutes. We're really talking about starting early if that's an opportunity that's here for you. And if it's not, then there are plenty of other ways to embrace this and to talk to older children and even adult children about these kinds of issues, these kinds of things. So let's get to the how. So here's just sort of like a list of tips on how to start these early conversations. And we will start with work out your own stuff first. And this is really important. And actually our next webinar in a few weeks, March 13th, I believe is the Saturday we're gonna do. It's gonna be all about the recipient perspective. And this is where we're really gonna get into this topic of working your own stuff out first. But it is really important to sort through your own feelings as parents first. And part of doing that is perhaps practicing your narrative and then really figuring out how am I gonna leave space for my child as well. Use obviously age-appropriate language, keep it simple and positive and grounded in love. Read or tell stories about your family and other kinds of families, and know that this is just the beginning of the conversation. It's not a one-time disclosure or something. It really evolves and grows. So it's important that parents are not just comfortable with their family's embryo donation story, but confident and proud about how their family was formed. If you think you're going to start crying or over explaining because you're anxious, take the time to work this out. You can work it out with a therapist. You can practice it, with your partner or friends or family. Just practice what you might want to say before talking with your child. And even though it's kind of remembering, like, even though this narrative often starts off as a struggle, remember that that struggle was yours and not your child's, and that embryo donation was a positive, beautiful thing for your family. In terms of age-appropriate language, just think about what your child might be able to understand and what might be too technical or too scientific. I personally do think it's best to use actual terms like egg and sperm and uterus, but start simple with accurate language. So what might that sound like? You might start by discussing the basics of how babies are made, with one part from usually a man's body called a sperm and one part from usually a woman's body called an ovum or egg. These two tiny cells come together to make an embryo, which is like a little seed that grows into a baby. When people need some help making a baby, a special doctor can help make embryos. Sometimes people have more embryos than they need, so they can give those embryos to other people who don't have any, so they can have a family. It's like how to make this sound super simple in 5 sentences, right? Like the fertility journey is years long, and here we go, distilling it down. But keeping it simple for kids, I think, is actually really important. When you start talking about the relationship or connection your child has to the embryo donors or donor helpers, that's when you can start giving a little bit more detail and just seeing how, like, what comes naturally for you. I often use the word connections because my daughter understands that. So because the embryo that became her was created with donor helpers, she will always have a connection to them. So you might also talk about how other babies are made in a bedroom. It's, again, this is just a jumping off point. It really depends on where people want to go with this. And it's also really important to remember, you don't have to get everything right the first time you share about embryo donation, because you will have many more opportunities. This isn't, like I said, it's not a one-time talk. It's a growing conversation that will change shape over the course of your child's life. And it's also really important to always encourage children to ask questions and give space for them to begin to form their own narrative as they develop. So we'll move to a slide of a couple books that I've found helpful. In the beginning, or like the early years of childhood, I really encourage people to make their own family story or baby photo book. That's what I did. And I'll share more about what that looked like in a bit. But, again, it's making up and telling stories about different family compositions, or about how some people, or you could even use animals, have, sometimes have too many embryos while others don't have enough. So they share and they help and they support each other. I really like those words and how it kind of connects families. And I think it's easy for children to understand those terms. There are also some embryo donation specific books for kids out there. But the books that I'm sharing here are some very more general sex ed books for young children that I found helpful, starting about when my daughter was around 4, I would say. So What Makes a Baby? So this book is just like straight up egg, sperm, uterus, and it's actually gender neutral. And my daughter really likes it. It helped to understand the actual ingredients one needs to make a baby. And then that one in the middle, that's the It's Not the Stork book series. Also, this one is for children 4 and up, and there are other books in this series for older kids as well. And this was actually where Jen started with her kids, talking to her kids about this. And it is really like a guide, a sex ed guide for young children. So I found that really helpful. And then it's also great to have books about all kinds of families, like We Are Family there at the bottom. Well, for me, it's the bottom right, but none of these aren't embryo donation books, but this one just shows that there are many kinds of family, and this idea of family diversity is a really important one as we talk about new family forms. And Gina will touch a little bit about that as well when she speaks. So we'll talk a little bit also about like what's the language? How do we describe these relationships for embryo donation? Sometimes I talk to people who feel like they don't know the right words or language to use around these embryo donation relationships. So here's just like a composition of things that we've heard and some things that people have landed on. people sometimes struggle with how to refer to egg, sperm, or embryo donors and genetic siblings who are raised in different homes, who they may or may not know. And this makes sense, right? This is like very new for a lot of people. So I think the first step is that parents first have to think about how you conceptualize this and how you want to talk about this with your child. And remember, with these early conversations, you're planting a seed without any real expectation that young kids are going to fully get it. Over time, concepts start to connect and make sense, and you'll continue the conversation. And this conversation will also look different if your arrangement was known or unknown. If you had known embryo donors, then you can call them by their names, and the children or genetic siblings by their names. I know some people like the term special cousins, sister or brother cousins. I think that's where Gina landed with her recipients, sister or brother cousins for genetic siblings, or auntie and uncle to refer to the donors. And this is really up to each family to decide. But as you're sculpting language, it's important to, if you have a known donor, then to talk about it and see what feels comfortable for everybody. And then really try to think about being as clear to your child as possible. Families formed through unknown embryo donation, and this is where I land, may not have much information about the donors. So if the identities of the donors are unknown or the number of genetic siblings is unknown, just be honest and prepare to respond to your child's curiosities to the best of your ability. Don't let a lack of information prevent you from being open and honest with your child. So it's really important to validate your child's feelings, to praise their curiosity, and to ask them questions about what they're thinking and feeling. When you don't have specific names or a relationship with your donors, I think it's fine to use the term embryo donor, or as I already mentioned, I refer to our donors as donor helpers. And I've talked to my daughter about her donor helpers, specifically the egg donor, who also helped other people have babies. So my daughter knows she has connections to different children we don't know because those children had the same donor helper. A few weeks ago, this came up, and she asked if those connections are her brothers and sisters. And I had this this deer in the headlights moment. And I took a deep breath and I answered that yes, they could be considered brothers and sisters who have different parents. We talked about how in our family, she's an only child, but that because we had donor helpers, she does have other connections that share her genetics. And again, Gina's going to talk more about genetics and how to really find the language around this. But I think I described sharing genetics as the different ingredients that come from the egg and sperm that are part of what makes her her. And we also, we talked about the fact that we may or may not be able to know those children one day. And that's where I think I get sometimes a little anxious in how she'll take that in. But I was trying to just answer her question and talk in a really matter-of-fact way. And I asked what she thought about the idea of having brothers and sisters who have other parents. She kind of took in the information and she accepted it for now. And she actually didn't really have a lot of thoughts about it. And I'm, fairly certain it'll come up again sometime down the line. But she also said she was really happy she was an only child because she will always get all the attention and she doesn't have to share her stuff. So, fair enough. There are certain things that are more important to some children at certain ages. So while I feel personally really comfortable telling her about genetic siblings, I feel less comfortable with referring to the egg donor and sperm contributor as genetic parents. So I don't, because that's not really that comfortable for me. As parents, we're doing the best we can. And even when we have thought it through and practiced, we might have moments where we feel a little thrown off. We have to be truly confident and secure in our roles as parents and dedicated to being clear and honest with our kids. And that leads me to this idea of talking to older children. I think we have one slide on this, and this is really a bigger topic of conversation. But I do understand that some people might be coming to this today with children who are older. And I really just want to validate that that's okay. And it's never too late to tell. Here are a few tips. So be honest, allow space for all possible feelings. Make sure they know that you are okay with however they feel. Encourage questions and curiosities. And there are specific situations that mental health support and some different resources that we'll share, I think will be really helpful to just kind of work through all of this and then allow the kids to have some opportunities for that kind of support. So I do advise that people seek support from mental health professionals with a specific background in assisted reproduction and donor conception if you need help talking to an older child. There are some good resources to help with disclosure, and even adults on the websites listed. Yep, there we are on the next slide. But I'll touch upon it quickly. So just being honest and really open to their questions and whatever feelings they present. It starts with a slightly more sophisticated version of the earlier story of how egg and sperm meet. But depending on your kid's age, they can understand things differently. But I think being just really open and presenting, with the situation and being really okay with whatever they feel. Understand that learning new information like this as an older child or teenager may be surprising or even upsetting to them. And, it could also be really interesting or exciting. It could be 100 possible feelings in between, and potentially no strong feelings at all. Or maybe, if you have teenagers, then it's like one feeling one day, maybe something the next as they start to process things. All of this is totally normal. What's most important is to let them have their feelings without trying to change or negate how they feel. If they're curious about their genetic connections, try not to interpret that as a rejection of you. If they are angry they weren't told earlier, know that's a normal reaction and give them the space and support they might need. And try to be aware of not putting your own feelings onto your child, meaning you don't want your child to be worried about how you might feel. And you don't want them to not be honest because they're afraid of hurting your feelings or something. You don't want your child to ever feel responsible for making you feel okay. You want them to know that whatever they feel is totally fine and you're there to support them. The best you can do is to be honest and to hold space for them and to accept whatever it might be. And just encourage open dialogue and questions. And again, an experienced mental health professional is a great resource if that feels appropriate for your family. So these different, did we look at the resources already? Here they are. So here are some resources. So VARTA is an organization out of Australia. And they've just done a really great job kind of shaping this landscape and have some different tools and videos and stuff like that. And so I think they're a great resource. It's varta.org.au, I think. The Donor Conception Network is another place that has a talking and telling series. So it gives some good information and some books to order as well. A lot of support there. And then if you're looking for a therapist in your area that has this background in assisted reproduction, ASRM.org is the American Society for Reproductive Medicine. Resolve often, I believe, has a good list of therapists as well. And then psychologytoday.com is just a general therapist resource, but oftentimes there'll be people who are listed or who list the specialty there. So also Moxie Education, I know Gina shared our bubble of all the different things that we're creating right now. But Moxie Education by Empower is coming soon. So we will have more tools and tips about how to talk to children and different things. So if you join the mailing list on our website, empowerdonation.com, then we can definitely keep you posted on all of that. So I think it's really important to highlight that feelings and perspectives and needs may and likely will change, and that's okay. As children begin to really understand genetics and form their identity, they may have different feelings. We can't always anticipate what this will be or look like for our kids, but we can commit to allowing space for kids to integrate their genetic information into their identity and be able to talk about it. I sometimes think about how my daughter might feel when she's older and really understands the lack of genetic connection. I wonder, what will it mean to her? Will it mean anything to her? Will she feel sad that she's not genetically connected to us? Will she look at her dad and I and be relieved that she doesn't have our genes? I just don't know. She might feel all of these things in the course of a week also, as she gets older. And while I don't know exactly how she will feel, I'm just not afraid of the conversation that may come from these feelings. As parents, we want our kids to be able to feel however they feel, and we want them to know that we can support them and love them through anything. So with that, I'll move to sharing a personal example. So this is, we kind of love this picture. We love this quote, but my husband and I dedicated the documentary we made to our daughter with this dedication at the end. And it's something a friend of ours said to us about the film and about her, and we believe it's really true, that every superhero needs a good origin story. So we're starting to think about these kids as superhero babies, and not just as feeling right to us in this moment in time. Okay, I'll share some of the ways that I've talked to my daughter about how our family came to be. And again, I share only as an example. Every kid is different and every family is different and has different beliefs and culture and comfort with certain language. So you know, or you will know your child best. I'm just going to give some highlights of how Noah and I started this conversation. So to recap, we're in an unknown embryo donation situation, and he and I did the work to process and understand what a lack of genetic connection might mean for all of us. I know how Noah and I feel, but I would never tell my daughter how she should feel about any of this. I know she's very securely attached to us and has no doubts about who her parents are. She's 5, so I also have to be open to however this might unfold for her. So we had some early conversations. And like I mentioned, I started the conversation early by making a little book for her when she was about a year old. And I actually don't have that book with me at all to share, but it was a photo book and it started with pictures of her about things she likes to do. She's a dancer, she's a climber, she would climb on anything. So it was pictures of her climbing, photos of her with her grandparents. And then there was a page that showed an egg and a sperm that I got off the internet and said something about how she was made with the egg and sperm from 2 kind people who were willing to help mama and daddy because we couldn't make a baby. And, and then we also had that famous embryo photo that we all have from transfer day, baby's first picture or whatever. And I remember when we would read this book, she would quickly skip over the egg and sperm page. And I was like, oh no, I don't even know how I felt, but she has feelings about this. And, it's funny how we project our own stuff all the time. So keep that in mind. But when I realized that her face was on every other page, she really just wanted to look at pictures of herself. The internet egg and sperm is just not super exciting. So, we moved through that. So I had this little book and I had other books about all different kinds of families created through adoption and surrogacy. Jamie Lee Curtis has a book on adoption and we read that one a lot. I remember Families with 2 Dad Penguins. There are a handful of books out there about different kinds of families. So when she was little and still now, I also really tried to just look for organic opportunities to talk about her donor helpers. Because I wanted that language to be normalized. I wanted her to hear it and feel comfortable and just know oh, that's a part of it. It's part of her, it's a part of our family. And so I'll share a couple specific things. When she was probably around 3, she once asked me why she has yellow hair and mama has brown hair. And I answered that she may have yellow hair because her egg donor helper had yellow hair, and some of the special things that make her her might be connected to her donor helpers. And that's the same thing with her athletic ability, because on the egg donor profile, we know that the egg donor was athletic. And if anyone knows me, I'm whatever is the opposite of athletic. So that's another quality or trait she may have inherited from her donor. And she's well aware of that because she has seen me run. And it's kind of interesting. I woke up and I texted Jen and Gina this morning because something happened last night, or rather I should say this morning at 3 a.m. that kind of highlights this as well. So my daughter's never been a good sleeper. We are generally awake at some point in the middle of the night, every night, swapping beds or whatever, just feeling crazy in the middle of the night. But this morning around 3 a.m., she woke up and I said something like, why does sleep have to be so difficult? And she said, you got a difficult little egg. And then she got into our bed and she snuggled next to Noah and was very pleased with herself and went to sleep. And that was that. But I just sort of laughed. She's kind of a crack up, but it's just part of her, and she's just integrating this in her own specific way. And the last example, my daughter, she was very tall when she's kind of leveled out now, but when she was little, around 2, she was off the charts kind of tall. And I remember one time we were at the park and a stranger, another parent or something, asked how old she was. And when I said 2, they nearly fell over. And they said something like, wow, is her dad super tall? And my answer was not really, but her egg donor was 5'11". And this leads into the idea of privacy and secrecy again, and the choice of who you share things with. And I'm not at all saying anyone needs to tell strangers in the park their conception story, but I'm sharing that felt okay for me. And it feels okay for me to talk about that with her present, because it is something that I feel really proud of. I think also in the line of work that I do, I have this sort of advocacy piece. So, that plays a role in all of this too, of course. But, and it's as she got a little older, we had more specific conversations. That's where those specific books about egg and sperm have been really helpful. my kid is 5 and knows what egg and sperm are, and that's great in my opinion. And, through play, I really noticed that she is integrating and understanding the concepts of different family compositions and donor conception. And so I have one picture that I thought was the kind of cute illustration of this. So a friend gave us some hand-me-down toys, this family of porcupines, but now I'm being told that maybe they're actually hedgehogs. So whatever these little guys are, there was also like a squirrel mom and like a little baby squirrel. And then there was this lone kitty, again, hand-me-down toys. So we had like kind of a mishmash of different characters. And she was unpacking them and setting up the little families. And so she said, this squirrel's a single mom and this porcupine family had a donor helper. That's how the kitty got in their family. And, we play family all the time. And right now she's really into being a single mom. That's her jam. But, she knows that some families have one mom or two moms. We have, family friends and things. And she knows that some families have one dad or two dads, and that different people might need support making a family. It's just part of life. She knows some children are adopted or they grow in other people's bellies. And I remember once when we were driving, this is kind of a funny story too, it's just kind of out of nowhere. And that's how these things happen, right? It's like you're kind of caught off guard because you're talking about something else, or you're just on your way to the supermarket or something. And she'll just, the kids will just ask a question. But she randomly asked if her best friend was made at home or at the doctor. And it totally caught me by surprise. And I think I said, like, well, what do you think? And so she decided that her friend was probably made at home. I don't know how that decision came to be, but that's just what she decided. So these are just some examples of natural conversations we don't make a big deal about. Some babies are made at home, some babies are made in the doctor's office. These aren't every single day conversations. I think some people worry, like, how do I have to talk about this all the time? And if it's just part of your family story, it becomes really natural. It becomes a really integrated and easy way to find these little opportunities to share and to be really proud of it and to instill that pride in your kids. Okay, so I'm going to share this little video. So we recently worked on a family tree where her donor helpers were the roots. And it's kind of a nice concept, that we're grounded and have these connections, and the roots are the donor helpers. And, our tree wasn't that beautiful or anything like that, but Gina will just show the video and then we can chat a little bit about it. We can't hear it.
1 minute.
Okay, let's start it over.
Okay, sorry about that.
Now it's okay. Let's see.
But could you hear it at the end when I unmuted myself? No. Uh-oh. I'm going to stop the share and reshare because I think I have to do that. I guess I did it wrong when I first.
We're still working out the tech.
There we go. Okay. Trying again. Can you guys see the tree story? Can you see anything?
Just, it says our family tree story.
Okay. No. Okay. I'm really sorry. Okay. I'm going to have to.
Or Gina can just reenact it.
No, I don't want to reenact it. Better than me. Okay. Thank you for everybody's patience. I'm a genetic counselor. I am not a tech goddess.
We all wear multiple hats at Empower, and you are the tech goddess.
Hang please. Hang to it.
This is just making us seem like very real people that are putting together a webinar.
Okay. You might miss the very first mommy, but just imagine that now. Okay. So am I sharing my screen? Not net. I'm going to start here.
Okay. Porcupine.
Okay, now ready and cue Mika.
Mommy, this is mommy at heart, and this is my heart, and then they connect, and then daddy's is right here, and then ours connect with daddy's. Mommy was sad. This is her face right here. And then when she saw Mika, and her eyes used to be like this, and now like a little wet when she saw Mika.
When I saw the embryo that became Mika, I thought, oh, yes. And I'm so happy for your donor helpers, you know, because they helped you come to be.
Boop, 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 boop. That was me and the egg right here.
Mm-hmm.
And then Mommy, her belly.
I got feet like a monster. Is that you in my belly?
Yes.
Yes, I actually did have feet like a monster under my belly. They got really like swollen.
How?
I don't know. It just happens sometimes. My body changed a lot when you were growing in my belly.
Why?
It was very exciting. That's just what happens. Your body gets a little bigger, rounder. How do you think Mommy felt when you started to grow in my belly?
Happy.
So happy.
Mommy, this is Mommy.
So that's a day in the life over at my house. 3 a.m. sass and some art and play and stuff like that. Again, not every day are we talking about donor conception, you know, but when we are, it feels meaningful and purposeful. And I think when you start as parents to just start thinking about this, then it becomes a part of how you parent, which is important. So I don't know that there's much to say about this particular video. I did ask permission to share these little snippets, but it does just make me feel like she's starting to understand things in a way that is matter of fact and also really grounded in love. So that's probably enough of me. We're sort of okay on time, knowing that we are giving this a little bit more, but Jen and Gina are now going to talk about how to talk to the children of embryo donors. And I really do think that much of what they're going to share is also helpful for recipients, especially talking about genetics and DNA and stuff like that. And I was also thinking of possibly leading a workshop about all of this that's more interactive, and I want to gauge interest. So if you would be interested in a more hands-on workshop about talking to kids and how to sculpt your narrative and how to practice and stuff, make a note of that when you fill out the brief survey that we'll email you, and that will give me a little bit of a sense if people are interested in continuing the conversation. So Jen and Gina, take it away.
Thank you. And thanks for your patience with me. I'm feeling a little bit nervous now all of a sudden about tech, so we'll see how this goes. I got a little bit trigger happy. Okay, so before Jen and I delve into talking to children of embryo donors, I want to talk a little bit about family diversity, because really that's what this is about. Families are not just biology, although that might be part of the story. I think this is equally important to all kids, not just kids who are in a family that have been touched by gamete donation. Really exposing kids to diverse families and diverse experiences is a beautiful introduction to life. And the world is diverse, and setting up kids to understand more about different families will help integrate this understanding so that children touched by gamete or embryo donation take pride in their identity story. And it's doubly important for families who have been created or involved in gamete donation, that if they stand out because others are not as aware of the different ways families come together, that they take pride in it and they have confidence in their narrative and their opportunity really in educating others about diverse family structures.
Okay, so this is officially part 2 of the webinar where Gina and I cover talking to children of embryo donors. So in other words, children of families who have chosen to donate their embryos. There are not as many books and resources out there for talking to children of embryo donors, but we are starting to see that change. I've worked with a lot of embryo donors over the years, and I want to let you know that I am and we are aware that this is not a one-size-fits-all conversation. We understand that the concept of talking to children of embryo donors covers a vast array of different types of families and situations. For example, maybe you decided to donate your embryos when your children were teenagers or even young adults, in which case introducing the idea early isn't an option, and the storybooks out on the market don't make sense for your family. In this case, maybe your children were introduced to the idea of donating before it even happened, and sometimes they may even be a part of the decision-making process themselves. On the other hand, maybe you decided to donate when you had young toddlers or even an infant, in which case introducing the idea that they have genetic siblings would be a completely different age-appropriate set of conversations. Maybe you also donated your embryos in an anonymous, quote unquote, or unknown way, and want to talk with your children about your decision and this idea that they may have genetic siblings in the world. You may be an embryo donor who donated embryos that are not genetically related to you or partially genetically related to you. In your case, you likely have donor conceived children yourselves, and a lot of what Maya described in the first section is also relevant to you. And I know that there are people listening to this webinar who are embryo donors and have yet to talk with your children about your decision to donate. That's okay too. Like Maya was saying earlier, it's never too late to listen and learn from this community and to find the best way to start these conversations with your children. So what I'm getting at here clearly is that there's no one common situation or right way to talk with your children about this stuff. But what we're hoping to do today is to provide you with some tips and tools that you can take away to create conversations with your family that match your own personal culture, personality, and communication style. In my case and in Gina's case, we are both fully genetically related to the embryos we donated. We will share our personal stories just so we have some examples for you. But as I've said, we're always aware that this is not a one-size-fits-all conversation.
A lot of the next few slides are similar to talking to children who are conceived via embryo donation, because the reality is that they have a lot in common with each other. Kids have a right to know that there are genetic connections out there. Secrets in a family can create a sense of shame. In this case, perhaps a sense of shame about the decision their parents made or about the existence of genetic siblings out there. But also it can create a loss of connection, both to people they might want to know, their genetic siblings, and also with their parents, because they're not really aware of their parents' entire story. And lastly, DNA testing makes anonymity impossible anyway. With so many people interested in at-home DNA testing, it's really only a matter of time before a genetic sibling might be found anyway. And that makes it important to shape the conversation and the unfolding story in a way that's helpful to the family functioning.
And this next slide as well is a duplicate of Maya's presentation, and she already did such an eloquent job of describing how to start these early conversations. One slightly different thing, as I just said, is sometimes these conversations aren't early when you have donated embryos and you already have children. But all of the same things still apply. Work out your own stuff first, practice your narrative and leave space for theirs. Use age-appropriate language. Keep it simple and positive and grounded in love. Read or tell stories about your family and other kinds of families. And know that this is an ongoing conversation. I think the wrap up of this is to really be comfortable, confident, and proud about what you're going to share with your family.
Absolutely. Similar to Maya, I set my kids up for their origin story by having my son's baby book start with a picture of him as an embryo and a picture of me and his dad at the embryo transfer, and then his ultrasound pictures from week 6 and on. And as we talk about, we talk about how much we wanted a family and how we tried for a long time before he finally came into our lives. Now, note, my little girl was born at a time where I was a little busier. So true to being a second child, she has no official baby book. But we use my son's baby book to explain the same concepts. And we add in that they were created together and her embryo was in the freezer for a longer time, and that we were just waiting for the right time to transfer her embryo. And as you can see here, my son's picture here, like I thought it was really, for his book, like it says worth the wait. And that was really the message that I've told my kids, is that they were absolutely worth the wait and they were the right kids for me. And so this whole experience, it has been a really beautiful way to start our family. I feel like breaking down the details though is into mini conversations is really important and is actually authentic to how the story unfolds for most people anyway. I've had a lot of different conversations with my kids about understanding their origins and biology. And I feel like there's really no need to rush it or get it all into the story in one chunk. Kids' attention span and interest level really can drive how far you go into each topic. And you want to leave space for them to react to each piece of information because it's really quite profound for them to understand all of these concepts at once. So when I think about it, I really wanted to formulate a couple different points that over the years we've planted seeds for. One is that egg and sperm unite to make a baby. Some people need help to make a baby. We needed help to make a baby. We were lucky to make several embryos. And why we decided to help other people make a baby, because we had remaining embryos. We talk about who we decided to donate to, whereas some families who may have donated in an unknown situation might set up a different conversation. The first part, though, of course, is interesting because my particular lens on the world makes it very easy to talk about the science. As a genetic counselor, this is what I talk about every single day, and my son has seen and heard so many of my PowerPoint slides and talking points over the years. So we've talked at various times about how some people, usually girls, are born with their eggs inside their bodies, and other people, usually boys, don't have eggs when they're born, but they'll create sperm when they're older. And when eggs and sperm get together, it can result in a baby. And so note here, my child is fascinated with the concept of a sperm and egg uniting, at least my older one, my son. This is where the conversation was super interesting to him. He's like, that looks like a tadpole. And like his reaction to just like this earth, shattering concept that he was created this way. For him, he found it quite fascinating. So we spent a lot of time on different websites and stuff watching this stuff. So I think it's just your child's interest level. My daughter, on the other hand, the first thing she thought, she's like, an egg? I hatched? You had eggs in you? I have eggs in me. Like it was just like this whole eggs, so I think everybody takes it differently, and it's really important to just full stop. Eggs and sperm unite to make a baby and let them react, because kids are going to have very different experiences of this information, and it's going to take a while for it to cement. So for me, like this was just the end of the conversation for a bit. Both my kids were far more interested in how small they were. So we talked about microscopes and why they're so tiny for a while before we ever got into the next concept. And my son, actually, when he learned what sex was at around age 6, he formulated the question to me this way. He's taking a bath, and all of a sudden it occurred to him, oh my gosh, Mom, if egg and sperm don't unite in a lab, if they don't use a lab, how does the sperm get to the egg? And I was like, oh my gosh, what am I going to say? Okay, I've practiced this. I can talk about sex, no problem. We can do this. And so, I explained the mechanics of sex to him, and he looked pretty disgusted and said, well, it's a good thing you and Dad didn't have to do that. And I didn't disagree. I just waited because that'll come again. So I think it's just, being aware that these are just conversations in, little tiny things that you just plant along the way. I'll turn it over to Jen for her part.
Yes. So first of all, that's a picture there of me, my twins, and their genetic brother, who is 5 years younger than them. My approach was somewhat similar to Gina's. However, I'm not a genetic counselor, so I didn't have quite such a scientific approach. I didn't have quite the language relating to genetics, and I wasn't experienced talking about eggs and sperm. Additionally, I would say that I have a very type B personality and style of parenting. I'm one of those people who bought a bunch of parenting books and never read them because I just feel more comfortable parenting on intuition. Additionally, the fact that I had twins mean that there's 0 baby books in my family. I did have intentions of doing them. There are 0 things in those. I should probably donate them to somebody else. So as I mentioned in my intro, my twins are my full genetic children. They were almost 4 years old when we decided to donate our one remaining embryo. And then they were 5 when the first baby, or the baby, was born. As you can imagine, based on what I've just told you about my personality, I didn't have a plan for exactly when or how I would tell the twins that they have a genetic brother who's 5 years younger than them. Some donors choose to do it as early as they hear there is a pregnancy, whereas others decide it's better to wait until their children can better grasp the concept of what a genetic sibling means, which is what I chose to do. Around this time, I was working with a counselor to help me navigate all of the emotions involved with embryo donation and the birth of my recipient son. I asked her for advice on how to talk with my children, and she suggested that I start by explaining how babies were made and recommended the book series, It's Not the Stork, which Maya mentioned a bit ago. As Maya said, it's an age-appropriate book to begin introducing the idea of just body parts, girls, boys, bodies, families. And that particular book is for ages 4 and up. So that's what I did. I bought the book and I started reading it to my 5-year-old twins. The process was actually very natural and they were very curious. They asked questions along the way and I answered them honestly. They quickly graduated to the next book in the series, which is called It's So Amazing, and it gets a little bit more into eggs, sperm, pregnancy, birth, and babies. That book is actually intended for ages 7 and up, but I began reading it to my children at the age of 5 because I just knew that they were ready. Reading these books and getting comfortable talking about eggs and sperm and the various ways that babies were made was not something I ever thought I would do with 5-year-olds. And my husband wasn't quite as comfortable reading the books, honestly, but he did it too, because he recognized that it was in the best interest of the children. So I felt that after reading the books, my twins had a really solid foundation of information, and they knew that they were born by a doctor putting mommy's eggs and daddy's sperm together in a lab, and then transferring the embryos back into mommy's body. At the time of reading the book, though, I did not mention that there was a third embryo because I didn't feel they were quite ready to grasp that concept.
You know, it's interesting, Jen's story with her husband and how he reacted. It reminds me a lot of how JP is. I've had the same experience where he, as soon as there's any talk about sperm or eggs, my husband makes just directly, this is your job. He takes care of any video game questions or any cooking questions, but for me, there's just literally, he's not going to answer it. And he's going to find mom because he knows I have a plan and I've thought about this. And so that's another piece is sometimes partners one of them is more interested in the subject than the other and really has a plan. And I think that's totally okay. For my family, it's worked really well because this is my thing that, all those questions really do come to me and he's kind of modeled, now seeing me do it so many times, he's getting more comfortable. But I think that is something sometimes one person does take in a couple, sometimes one person kind of takes that job on of this. But as a parent, also, you kind of just know when your kids are ready for a new concept. When I felt pretty solid that my son understood sperm and eggs, I laid the foundation for DNA and I got to the really exciting stuff, in my opinion. I'm still working on this with my daughter, but she's getting there. I think she's just not as much interested in science yet. She's more social, she's more interested in people. So for her, the interesting thing is not at all about how these embryos came to be, but who they will possibly be. And so that's, for us, I think is an interesting thing. The first question though, out of my son's mouth, as soon as we talk about, there's DNA in the egg and sperm, he's like, what's DNA? And let's talk about it. And I want to take a small detour to genetics and breaking this down for kids, because a lot of people have asked about how this concept can be folded into how a baby is made conversations. So I can model it for you here in case this is a helpful way to think about it as you make your own plans. But really, DNA is kind of an abstract topic. So I think it's really helpful to use analogies. This is how I describe it to kids. If you think about your body, it really is an amazing thing. It's made up of tiny little cells, so many that I can't even count that high, which kind of function in specialized machines. You have brain cells in your brain. You have eye cells in your eyes. And they all have different jobs. Your brain cells help you to think, your eye cells help you to see, your stomach cells help you to digest your food. But inside every one of those cells is a copy of an instruction manual, the same instruction manual. The instruction manual is called DNA, and it's made up of thousands of genes that tell your body how to develop and function. Genes are like sentences from the instruction manual that we have to follow step by step. Each of our cells follows the instructions and they're part of the instruction manual. So brain cells will use the brain instructions or brain genes, and stomach cells will use the stomach instructions or stomach genes. Animals and plants even have DNA. They need an instruction manual that tells all their cells how to function. But what's cool about all of us is that our DNA is unique. We're all different than each other, unless you have an identical twin. That's pretty rare, but identical twins have the same DNA. But back to the point, we are all unique because we get our very own instruction manual, our very own special DNA in our cells. My instruction manual got formed when a very special sperm met a very special egg, and your instruction manual got formed the same way. Sometimes our special sperm came from a dad, sometimes it came from a donor helper, and sometimes our special egg came from a mom, and sometimes it came from a donor helper. Our DNA is like the merging of the instruction books from the sperm and the egg. You might have some similarities to the sperm instruction manual, and you might have some similarities to the egg instruction manual. It's the reason that Mika's hair was yellow, similar to her donor helper who shared her egg. It's the reason my kid's hair is black, although they'll say it's dark, dark, dark brown, similar to their dad who shared his sperm to make them. A lot of things, but not everything about us is related to our instruction manual or the DNA that makes us us. It ranges from what we look like to silly things like whether we can roll our tongue. And it may even have something to do with what we like to do with our free time. A lot of time, it's a combination of what's in our DNA and the way we choose to live our lives that makes us uniquely us. And we can be proud because nobody is like us, unless you have an identical twin, and that makes you doubly special. So your DNA is one part of your story, of course, but it's also what you do with your DNA that counts. The different foods you eat, the time you spend playing, the things you read or hear or create will help you to tailor your instruction manual. It's kind of like bookmarking pages and finding a reason to come read and reread the same section. Some pages you'll use a lot, and some pages you'll barely use. And as you get older, you start to be in charge of that instruction manual, and your choices will change the way your instruction manual is read. But you'll always have the basic instruction manual there to help your cells do their jobs. And you're connected to other people who have similar instruction manuals to yours. That might be your mom or dad. That might be a donor helper. Families are made in different ways. So that's my DNA piece. Feel free to use the concepts there as they make sense to you and weave in a little biology and genetic information into your conversation with your kids. One thing that's nice is that we're starting to see gamete donation in the media in a more holistic way, featured as pieces to identity stories and character development. So when we think of the question, what are genetic connections, it's starting to have a deeper meaning, even for people that were conceived with gamete donation or embryo donation. So far, I haven't seen a mainstream children's show or cartoon that features a family that came together through gamete donation, but I'm sure it's on its way, and I'm sure we're going to have something pretty soon. One clip that really touched me was the audition video for American Idol contestant Elizabeth Gaba. And we thought we'd play a quick version of that story for you today, and then talk a little bit more.
I've always known that I was born via an anonymous egg donor, and my mom has always been encouraging of me going out and finding my egg donor. I haven't heard my mother's voice in a while.
I was very positive about it. I think we all have an interest in, what our genes might be.
They just met for the first time. Very excited. Very excited. It is exciting.
Oh, you kind of look alike.
Well, yeah. There you go.
I actually had to promise I was never going to look for you, so I was so glad that you found me, and now we get to have this relationship.
It was such a thrill that she found Amy, and they have the same passion.
Back when I was in college, I was one of the first members of, at the time, very small group, the SoCal Vocals. It was an a cappella group on campus. And 20 years later, Gaba not only goes to my college, but is also singing in that exact same a cappella group. It's crazy.
You being in the vocals was kind of the last thing I expected. It's super crazy. It's just really, really wild. Amy has become a really important part of my life, and I now consider her to be one of my really close friends.
I will forever be grateful to Amy for the gift that she gave us of Elizabeth. When I hear her sing, when I go to watch her perform, and certainly on American Idol, I will think that. It's the greatest gift you can give someone.
The fact that both my mom and Amy were willing to fly out to Idaho with me to be here means the absolute world. I really hope that I can make them both proud today.
Hi, what's your name?
My name is Gaba.
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 It's my last name.
Oh, what's your first name?
Elizabeth.
Okay. So finding curiosity and meaning in genetic connections is exciting. and something I'm loving about my own journey as an embryo donor. But open connection between families and gamete donation hasn't always been available as an option, and we're all sort of defining these new relationships as we have them. And that's why we're so passionate about creating our educational tools to share what we've learned and help people find their best path.
So now I'm going to talk a little bit about my children again and their understanding of their genetic connections. There again in that photo, you see my twins with their genetic brother. Part of what makes my relationship with my recipient and her son so ideal for my family is that they travel to my hometown twice a year. Well, at least they did pre-COVID, because she has family in the area. So it's just this really sweet way to naturally connect with them a couple times. And we've even made a habit of babysitting him when he comes to town. So that's been a really lovely experience. The first time my children met their genetic sibling was around his first birthday. Again, they didn't yet know who he was because, as I mentioned before, I was waiting for a moment where my children could really grasp the concept in a way that made sense to them. I was working on my intuition and waiting. And we had already talked about the biology stuff, like I said, and they knew how they were created. One little note, if you watched our previous webinar on relationship options, you may recall that I let my recipient choose the language of how she refers to my family. So she chooses to call me and my husband aunt and uncle, and our children cousins. In my family, we just tended to call them by their first names. 2 years ago, when we were getting ready to attend the baby's second birthday party, the twins asked me why a boy who isn't their cousin called them cousins. I started by explaining that they were really important people in our lives. But as I was saying that, I thought I could imagine from the perspective of my children that this relationship probably seemed different from other important people in our lives who they had known since their birth. So I just chose that moment to tell them. We were actually out at a restaurant for lunch, and I did it on a whim. I started by saying, remember how mommy explained that the two of you were created by an egg and a sperm in a doctor's office? Well, this 2-year-old was created at the same time. And I went on to explain that the difference is that he was frozen in a drawer for 4 years, whereas they were transferred into mommy's uterus. And I've been saying drawer for years, and Gina and Maya just informed me that it's a tank. So I think it's funny. I'm always going to say a drawer. But the amazing thing is they took a small breath, and the first thing my daughter said was, "So we have a brother?" And I was just blown away by that. And then my son said, "Wait, so are we technically triplets?" So that was their first response. And I was just amazed at their reaction and their ability to process this information easily. I went on to tell them that they would be able to have a relationship with this human in whatever way feels good to the three of them. I explained that even though they refer to us as cousins, they can refer to him in whatever way feels good, including brother someday. One of the interesting things about that moment was they didn't really ask a lot about why, we chose to donate this embryo. I do know that they know that a big part of it now was the fact that I wanted to have another mommy experience the love of having a child. And that was really important to me. Over the last couple of years, I've noticed that my daughter feels a really strong connection to him. She loves reading the monthly updates we get from his mom, and she really likes telling people she has 2 brothers. This is sometimes confusing, especially for families that know us well, but don't know our whole story. But I never wanted my children to hold a secret. So I let them know. I never have shamed them for saying something, to a friend that now I have to explain something to, because it's just really important that they go through this process, being able to say what they want and process it how they want. I will, however, say that it does result in some awkward moments, which we will get into a little bit later. I think Gina's going to go.
Yeah, these are complex questions and complex decisions in a time where we've not had these relationships modeled. To be honest, that's where most of our conversations center in my house these days. My daughter is really not that interested in sperm and eggs, as I've said before. She's way more interested in her sister cousin, which is the language we use for her right now. And it's a little complicated because, again, I donated to a family member, so it's a little bit more precise in our family. And for us, this decision is really about creating a new family structure as we live it, making decisions to live our lives with intention and thoughtfulness about how they affect others. And sometimes I connect that concept to what I think life is about in general, making it up as you go along, embracing change. So these are the conversations that we have in our house. And I relish the moments that my kids ask a question that gets us to these core values in our family. And I encourage people who are broaching this conversation to do so from a place of comfort. Whatever belief system that you have, if you come from a place of curiosity with your kids, you can do this in the way that feels most authentic to your family. When supporting children with this new information about how their family came to be and your decision to donate, it's important to accept and acknowledge all feelings, value your child's opinion, and of course, be prepared for the kid retelling of the story. What I mean by that is that the kid retelling might sound a little harsh and they might do it publicly. Hearing their interpretation of it will help you connect with them and also see where they might be misunderstanding something important to you as a family. And it's important to prepare emotionally because they might not see it the same way you do. And being secure in your decision and your parenting through this complex decision will help your family far more in the long run than controlling the narrative will. Really, children's questions are an opportunity to explore something together, and that can be a really beautiful thing. And of course, again, your personality, your culture, your communication style will play a role in how you communicate this to your children. I think we all have different family culture, and it just plays out differently for all of us. Sorry, I meant to nicely transition that to Jen. Go ahead.
No, that's fine. You know, we've given you a lot of information today and we're getting close to wrapping up. We just have a few more things that we want to share with you. I'm hoping that a takeaway from today's talk is when you have these conversations that you may need to get comfortable talking about eggs, sperm, sex, and baby making. And you also may need to get comfortable with your children telling other people. So I wanted to show you this one example of how on the first day of school, my daughter answered the question, why my family rocks. This moment was conveniently recorded because of online learning.
Why does my family rock? My family rocks because I have a twin brother. My family rocks because I had another brother, but my mom thought that that would be too much to take care of. So she froze the other one. And now he lives with his mom in New York and is almost 4 years old.
Okay, so
she didn't say she froze the other one in a drawer. So I'll just
okay. Apparently she's not listening close enough. So as you can imagine, I mean, I just love that so much, and it makes me laugh every time. And as you can imagine, I swiftly wrote her teacher an email to explain that, well, that wasn't exactly how it happens, and it wasn't really because mommy was too busy, but yes, that there was a frozen embryo who's now their genetic brother living across the country. So the takeaways here are just that, there are just these opportunities everywhere to increase the narrative, to explore their feelings, to let them be natural, to let them express themselves. And we just need to be open as parents to help them do that. We also wanted to touch a bit on expanding the conversation. I feel like this could be a whole other topic, but really talking about the extended family that will be either witness to these conversations or a part of our journey, and our children will want to have connection and support from them as well. Not everyone in our lives will know how to respond to the things that our children say, and that's okay. Actually, this is a picture of my mom and the twins. And I was talking with her recently, and she reminded me of the time when, out of the blue, my daughter asked her if she was the donated embryo's grandma. My mom really didn't know how to answer. In retrospect, I could have shared more tools with my mom or had a conversation with her about possible ways to respond. Similarly, my son recently wrote my mom a text and said that he misses his genetic brother because we haven't been able to see them due to COVID. This blew us both away because he doesn't talk about him as much as my daughter does. And I actually had no idea that he misses him. So what my mom did, and I'm really thankful for, is she shared the text with me. Again, she wasn't exactly sure how to handle it. So she encouraged me to do it. And that's what I did. And that's okay too. Sometimes referring back to the parent for these big discussions can be the best thing to do. But that said, we definitely want to recognize the value of extended family and support for the kids. We want to lay the groundwork for other adults in the family circle, not just grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, close family members. And then again, we really want to recognize that these are opportunities to just add to the narrative and add to the growing support for our children.
When I asked my son what he thought about our embryo donation, because I was hoping I could catch him on video or something to share his thoughts on it, I asked if I could record it. He said no. He's getting a little self-conscious, and I think he wants to be more of an authority on the topic before he speaks publicly. But these are things that we take very seriously. Our children all gave permission to share their thoughts because in the ways we have, because we think that's a really important piece of this, that their understanding and their beliefs about it are important, and that we respect those. But when I asked him what he thought, when I told him what I was planning to talk about, he said, it's hard to talk about. I don't really remember it. I mean, I was frozen when it happened, or I guess I only knew them when I was frozen, and I didn't have eyes or ears or even skin. So it's hard to say. And then a few seconds later, ooh, that was a close call. When I asked what he meant by a close call, because he was actually standing on a bed and balancing, and I thought maybe he was talking, I thought maybe he's not talking about this, but he said, well, I mean, I could have been one of those ones you gave away. I could have been one of your I could have been one of your children, your embryos that you gave to someone else. All the preparation that I've put into parenting and genetic counseling to this point has given me the wisdom to not jump in and try to control the narrative. Instead, I simply ask, oh yeah, do you think about that sometimes? And so he gets to be himself, curious, analytical, and develop his own way of coping with this profound concept. I get to hear the gears moving in his head, and I get to be there to ponder how profound life is with him. It would be a missed opportunity for connection and setting up a relationship for our whole lives if I couldn't put aside my own need to control the narrative so I could see his perspective. And I could be chasing down the wrong teachable moment to mom-splain something to him. I've learned that staying quiet and hear the gears turning is more fun anyway. With embryo donation, though, there's this element that these embryos could have been part of our family. They were conceived in love, and we saw them for their potential. I could not just move past my own fertility story and the fertility stories that were in front of me every day. I knew there were amazing people out there that would see these embryos as the precious opportunity for a family that they are. And I could not help but feel that somehow the universe gave me this important opportunity to share our family circle and our love a bit more widely. My own story came to mean so much more to me when I had the decision of what it meant to share in someone else's family story. For a long time, though, I was really stuck on the lingering what if when I conceptualized the telling of this story to my kids. What if we had made a different decision? What if we had more kids? What if one of those embryos was them? What if we had decided to discard them instead? These are big and profound questions, and they might have them too, or they might not. Or maybe the questions won't mess with their heads too much. I think that's the weight of this decision for a lot of donors. It's a million different possible futures, and we had to choose one of them. With IVF, you have the most intentional act of family creation. And then a subset of those people who have remaining embryos have to have a little moxie. They sometimes make a really gutsy move when they're done with it. They have to choose a future. The one we chose was donation. It's not the one that everyone chooses. And I don't think it's the right one for everyone. I think I leaned a little too heavily into letting my son see that. I think I would see that as we explored things with him, that all people make different decisions, and seeing that as a very human thing to do. It's the natural way that I explore most things with him. So for us, that was just a natural thing. But it also made him think of his own identity as a close call. My first reaction was yikes, but also that's where I lean in because I find him and his thoughts to be endlessly fascinating. And sometimes I think the same thing of my origin story, like, oh my gosh, like it's possible that couldn't have happened. And there's just a million other ways it could have gone. And I think that is truly the way our minds work. So for me, I'm accepting of that. I don't need to tell him it was some other way for us, because we can just, work with this together. But one thing I want my kids to know is that this was a decision we made as the adults in the family, and we want them to know that we took it seriously. We think we made the decision that makes the most sense to our family. We love their sister cousin, and we will love any others that come from the remaining embryos, but we felt like this was the best thing for them, for us, and for the other embryos. I want them to at least hear us, that the intentional act of creating kids this way makes us respect what it means to want a family so badly. We can't help but relate to the next group of fertility patients and want to pass a little of our luck on. It's not to say it's not a difficult or serious decision, but it's a choice to view our own fertility journey through another lens. Ultimately, this was a decision that had to do with who I wanted to be as a parent and a person in the world. And it took time for that concept to crystallize, as it does with most people. It really took the changes that occurred after I became a parent. So in my house, the embryo donation discussion really has more to do with what it means to be a family, what it means to be a parent, what it means to be an adult, and to make conscious choices about what type of life you might have. And it's about loving yourself even when you have to make hard decisions. And that's a picture of me with my little girl, because my son, I couldn't find a good picture of him recently. So there you go. That's not my son, that's my daughter. I think at this point we can turn it over to Q&A. Maya, have you had a chance to read through some of the questions while through the second?
Yeah, I've been trying to look through the questions and sort of pull themes, and again, we want to protect people's privacy, so I don't totally want to read things out loud. But I'm also noticing that some of these questions came in early, so perhaps they've been answered a little bit. So I can just start reading through what was sent in, and maybe we can also put up the last slide that just has more information about us. Is there a last slide, Gina, with,
sorry.
Yeah, so like, here's how to stay connected to us. If we don't get to a question, or if it doesn't feel like it's answered properly or something in this format, feel free to write to us. And again, a handful that I'm reading are mainly from recipient perspectives, and that's what we're really going to focus on for the next webinar, and kind of get down and dirty in all of that stuff. But one question is regarding when and how do we talk to family about a child's story? So this person has a young child and has been planting the seeds of the story with this child, but hasn't told the larger family about it, thinking that the story was really the child's to tell. And I hear that too, and really value and respect that. And again, we talk about all this stuff as a framework. You have to decide what feels right to you. And, but with that said, I think Jen did a nice job of how her mother was a good support and kind of has been integrated. If you share something with your child, there is a likelihood they might share it with somebody else. And so you want to make sure extended family don't look surprised or shocked or tell them that they're wrong or something to that extent. So it is important when you think about, okay, if I'm going to give this information to a young child, who else in my inner circle do I need to share this with? And how can I share this in a very, specific and beautiful and matter of fact and loving way? And so it's kind of like that practice. And, again, this is kind of hard to answer in these kinds of scenarios, because every family, culture could be very specific to a certain family. And, and I think too, as we do work as Empower, I keep thinking of other workshops that could be really helpful. So grandparent workshop, right? Like how to talk to a different generation, how to really think about how to share that story. But with the question being how and when do we talk with our family about this story? I would say probably before you share with your young child about it, just so that they have an understanding and they can respond in a way that's really loving and supportive. So hopefully that helps.
I actually saw a kind of a tangential question to that down the line from an MFT talking about, you know, even talking to extended family, that when there are religious considerations for others as well. And I think I wanted to touch on this because I think that that's something we all see within even our own families. People have very different views of this. So I think that just being aware of your own family values, being aware of like what your core values are, and talking to your kids and shaping your narrative really intentionally beforehand can be very useful. And there are ways that people, even that have different perspectives and are involved, can still see it as a beautiful thing. I think sometimes maybe just giving them the resources so that they can educate themselves and think about it in the way that feels positive because they love your children, I think is something that's very helpful. I'm hoping a lot of extended relatives watch this webinar in the future and maybe use some of these tools themselves so they can kind of figure out how to fit into the narrative, because a lot of times they want to, they just don't know how to talk about it.
Yeah. And I think, you know, I'm going to plug just mental health support again, because I think a lot of these things, it's really important to get specific to your family. We're kind of operating from a general standpoint to the best of our ability, you know, and sharing our own personal, which is very, you know, 3 specific examples. But, you know, people do have various cultural elements, religious elements, spiritual elements, all of these pieces that have to be integrated so that you can find your voice and that your child can feel really comfortable and confident, and that can be translated to the not just extended family but friends and other people as well. How should I do this? Should I just keep kind of reading on? This is how and when do we talk with this child about there possibly being another genetically related sibling for a child who was born through embryo donation and has been begging for another sibling. So the sibling that your child is begging for is a sibling that will live in your house and that your child can boss around and play with and whatever else. So it's a little bit of a difference in having genetically related siblings raised in other homes, perhaps. So being able to differentiate that concept might be helpful. How and when do we talk with this child about there being another sibling? You know, again, up to you and how it unfolds. I think this was kind of an early question, it's, you know, 10:15-ish. So maybe we've covered this a little bit, but just kind of to recap, the way I do it is I talk about connections. And because we had donor helpers, there are other children that my daughter, you know, or your child is connected to, and they could be considered siblings. But they're not siblings that are going to be in our home, you know. And so part of it, you know, having another child is not an option for me either. So part of the work that we do as recipients sometimes is we're reframing what we thought our family was going to look like. And so it sounds like there might be a step 1 with parents to just really think about, okay, we wanted other siblings, or we know that our child wants other siblings, but sometimes that just doesn't happen. And so we think about what we do have and how, you know, the wonderful it is to be an only child in some ways. But again, leaving space for the child to talk about that however they feel like it, so that you're not saying, well, you know, I don't know. It's not dismissive in any way. I don't know, Gina, you might have a thought about this, but I think it's really, yeah, it's okay.
Yeah, I mean, actually, one of the first drafts of this webinar, I took the slide off, was we have a table topics thing we do at dinner at night a lot, and we have this question, just this box of questions we ask them, and my kids are really used to hearing, oh, what is your opinion on this? What is your opinion on that? One day the question came up, would you rather be an only child or have 10 siblings? And my kids, hands down, were immediately like, 10 siblings. And I thought it was funny. I texted the picture to Maya, and she's like, well, Mika would choose only child. And so it's interesting that, you know, in our families, I mean, for my kids, it did put this moment on me, like, oh my gosh, like my children would have preferred to have that huge family. And like my daughter sometimes talks about having a sibling and these kinds of things. And, you know, for me, I've really come down to, I had to make the adult decision in our family that made the most sense for us. And sometimes it's a choice, sometimes it's less of a choice. It feels more like it's put upon you that this is the end of your pregnancy journey and things. But for me, like, it just gave us more opportunity to explore why the world is the way it is, why for us this felt like the right family size, why things are the way they are, and helped me to explore our own family story within the context of our larger family story, where my parents came from, how many siblings they had, how life was, all of these things. And it can just be an opportunity for this complex question and this thing that we feel like we can control for our kids. Maybe not. It's just a part of life, and you can just open that conversation up. So that's how it's worked in my family, is that I just take it bigger, even instead of feeling like I have to have an answer, like that I'm supposed to meet this need that this child just decided they had, that we can talk about everybody's needs, and like how, and not just needs, but how you shape your life.
And I think this leads a little bit, there's a question sort of much farther down for somebody who clearly knows me a bit, and says, Maya, do you talk to your daughter about the cycle that didn't work with her genetic sibling? So I actually do. And that's part of the reason she's an only child. And I'll say she feels comfortable being an only child a lot of the times, but sometimes she does wish that she had a sister, especially during a pandemic where she's alone and she hasn't seen a child. And that brings up a lot of feelings for me. Parents have to look at what feelings are coming up first for them, right? And it's such an important piece to kind of work that out. And but I have talked about trying for siblings with her. And again, this is not something that everybody might choose to talk about. I had a natural pregnancy after her when she was about 2 that I lost at 10 weeks. And so we've talked about that before, that some people, get pregnant or want to have another baby, and then it doesn't work out. You have to be really comfortable with this kind of dialogue and narrative. And we also did, after that experience, we transferred another embryo from her batch. There were 2. And it worked for a hot minute, and then it didn't work. We didn't tell her when we were going for the transfer or anything like that. I mean, she was really young, and it just seemed like that might be a little bit too confusing. But now when we talk about siblings or genetic siblings, we talk about, we tried and we tried, and that's our family is how we are. And she likes the word trio. So she'll be like, we're a trio, and I think it just, again, shifting to any feeling of deficit to like pride in what is, and really kind of coming to terms with that and helping empower the children to feel that way as well. I'm scared we're kind of at the 90-minute point. We'll stay on to continue to answer questions. If we can't get deep into everything and there's something that's left, reach out to us. Where am I here?
I'm having a hard time organizing which question to answer. I think there's so much.
Yeah, it's a lot, and we're really excited that people are so interested, and is making me really feel like a recipient workshop where people can actually see each other that's not recorded would be really beneficial in some way. So we're going to think about that. But
I see one question I think would be good to answer. What would you tell your daughter if she asked why the donor helpers didn't choose her? Similar to Gina's son, who brought up the possibility. And Maya, do you talk to your daughter about the cycle that didn't work?
What I answered. I kind of pulled that piece.
But did you pull the part about what? I'm sorry, I'm a little bit distracted.
No, I didn't. I don't think about the donor helpers choosing. See,
that's the thing. I think about it, and that was my. I had this part on the donor side. It's like I had to be very aware that, like, as a recipient, the recipient's child going to feel like they weren't chosen. But see, that's the thing. It's like her story is so uniquely her, and it's like I think that's the perspective of recipient versus donor. But for my children, I'm aware that could come up, and for me, I really want to be really clear that, like, this is just like a science. Like, every embryo is just assessed from, like, well, what do they look like on the outside? Did they do genetic testing? And it's really more of like, it's just science where they're trying to figure out which ones will give them the best opportunity to have a pregnancy. So when I think about talking to children, I always think of it just, these families are trying to have a baby, and there's nothing specific about those embryos that they can understand about them other than this one looks like it might make a baby. And sometimes it's like they look at them under a microscope to see which one has the best chance as the first opportunity. It doesn't mean that any one of them is prioritized over the others in any other sense. It's just like they're looking for an embryo that might make a baby. And for my family, it just was sort of random luck that happened to be the embryo that became my son and then my daughter.
Yeah, and maybe I would share, like, that's never come up. I've actually never conceptualized it, because the doctor just puts in what's, it's like it feels random to me, but maybe that doesn't sit well for other people. the donor helpers get, you know, and also, and I think there's another question about this, when you're created, the original embryo is created with a sperm or egg donor as well. And that's my situation. So there was an egg donor. So my child was created from the egg donor, and then the husband is the sperm contributor of another couple that worked with an egg donor. So there's a level of, there are layers. I saw a question about that, like, what do you do when there are layers? So the egg donor is the egg donor, and then there are embryo donors. And I just identify them as that. There are two people that are embryo donors, but the part that created the embryo was the sperm from the husband of that couple. And he was the sperm contributor. He wasn't exactly a sperm donor, so I don't use that word. He was a contributor to that embryo. And then the egg donor donated other times and helped other people. So the donor helpers, the embryo donors had their child, and then there were more embryos, and so they decided to help somebody else. And that's kind of how I would just say it. I don't know, maybe it's, I got to think about it a little bit more, but yeah, where else to go with some of these questions? A double donor with unknown origins. I hope that was answered a bit, that even, you know, it's interesting. It's like when I hear, or I see, especially Jen's pictures with the child, you know, with her child's genetic, her children's genetic brother and things like that, you know, I have these moments where I feel like, oh, my kid might not have that, or we're not connected because it was unknown. And I've learned that the egg donor donated multiple times. So I really don't have a sense of how many people out there might be genetically related to my child. And, you know, sure, does that cause some feelings of anxiety? Yeah, at times. But then it's like coming back and getting grounded in what we do know. And the curiosities might be there and they might not. And it's just really feeling more and more confident that, you know, we had help, and this is the situation we were in, and this is what it might be. And we're okay with all of that. So when you have an unknown origin, you know, sometimes it might be a little harder in some ways, but I think if you just practice the language and see what feels right, that hopefully it'll start to roll in a way that feels good for everybody.
One of the things I wanted to touch on in the questions it came up a few times, is whether or not, you know, we're worried about, or have our children been made fun of due to their origin story. And my experience thus far is absolutely not. It's amazing. I think this generation of children, what is just like no big deal to them. And so I have never come across that at all. In fact, I think most people that my children have shared with just think it's really cool. Like, wait, you have another brother and he lives across the country in New York and things like that. That is not to say that couldn't happen. You know, I'm living in a very liberal part of the United States in Portland, Oregon. And so, you know, maybe, you know, children could come across, you know, bullying in some way, but I don't think that would be a different conversation than any other. You know, all of our children are going to be made fun of at some point for being bullied in some way or the other. And I don't think the conversation would be that different, but I would not let it stop you from really encouraging your child to be able to express themselves.
And I also, and the question also as part of that was, do you tell them to keep their story private? And we don't. And, you know, it, again, family choices, you know, and you might equip your child to say, you know, this might be different for some people. And so if you choose to talk about it, that's fine. But you might want to, you know, nod or something like that. But we just don't ever want to have our kids feel like, don't tell anybody because there's some kind of shame around it. That's what we don't want to have happen. So again, we want to like respect people's comfort and their own family values and stuff like that. But to asking a child to keep something private usually insinuates some kind of shame or something like that. And I think we want to embrace all of this and feel proud about it and just like allow our kids to have that. So hopefully.
I noticed that one person suggested, you know, maybe calling certain people safe people to talk about. And I do like the concept of I don't know that I'd use the word safe, but I do like the concept of saying, you know, if you do talk with grandma, she knows, or whoever, she knows a lot about, you know, I've shared a lot with her and she might know how to respond. But if you happen to say something to somebody else, they might not. And you can either come to me and talk with me about that, or, you know, that person can, sort of in the way that, even though my mom is a very safe person, she still wanted, you know, me to kind of help my son navigate that situation. So I do think that you can sort of designate some people that you can say it may be easier to tell them because they understand. They might use different terminology.
And I think sometimes there's this like bigger fear that like your child's going to know something and then like run out and just start telling everybody. And, you know, look, kids are kids, they might, but it doesn't usually exactly happen like that. You know, this is part of them and it's just part of, you know, their family and whatever else, but they're talking about the shows that they watch and the toys that they're into and just like other things. So if it comes up, it comes up, and, you know, it should feel okay for them, but it's not like that like their goal is to share everybody. When we're feeling a little insecure or self-conscious about our own story that feels private, you know, being shared with other people, we're going to project some of that, or we're going to just really kind of turn up the volume on the worry around things being shared. But again, I think it's really thinking about like, okay, what's my stuff and what are my feelings about this and things like that. Gina, did you have something?
Yeah, I thought that it's really kind of in some way an opportunity too for children to feel really special and important. And in a world that's changing, that's not really far-fetched. That's not just being optimistic. It's, you know, this is sometimes something that they can take as an opportunity to explain to other people. Actually, families are formed in lots of ways. And if they come from that place, from that perspective, they will often just find themselves to have like this position of authority in educating other people. And that can be a very proud thing for them if it's set up that way in their families. And so for me, I was thinking of it myself when I was creating that slide about family diversity. And originally we had it as like, it's everybody's job to talk about family diversity, but that's not really true. It's an opportunity to talk about family diversity and to kind of change the narrative in the way that really feels authentic and valuable to the kind of your core values as well. So, you know, finding our own way in our world to shift our culture. If we think somebody's trying to bully over something like this, then maybe we have an opportunity as parents to put something different into the world with our own kids and the way that they talk about things.
Although I might get real fired up if my kid gets bullied.
Yeah, right. I know.
There's another question. I'm trying to distill it down just a little bit, but it sounds like this question is about a child who shares some specific things or qualities with an egg donor, shall I just keep those to myself while this child is growing up, unless there are questions about it? Just concerned about the child kind of having a sense of longing for an egg donor in areas where the parent might be lacking or different or something like that. So am I making sense of this question without kind of giving too much out there? So it's really, you know, we land on donors sometimes that have different strengths, or we notice that if the donor has a certain profession and our child is really kind of leaning towards that in some way as a young child or something, do you share these kinds of things or do you not? I think if you're going to share it, you got to feel comfortable with it. And you've got to feel comfortable that your child might have different strengths that you did not genetically contribute to, just as they'll have other strengths and ways of being in the world. That is nurture all the way, you know? And so for me personally, I really embrace that my child has these great things that I could never have given her, you know? And I think that she feels pride about that. There's no feeling that it disconnects her from me or makes me less of a parent. So I think that's the underlying message.
And I think it's because she feels valued by you, your vision of her, you're noticing that and giving, and you're valuing those things about her. And I think that's a really important piece in the way that we think about our kids.
Yeah, that's just part of her, you know, she, you know, my daughter asked a more direct question about her hair color. She was very blonde as a child, and she was born with black hair and then it turned blonde, and now it's kind of back to brownish, but she had a direct question, and that gave an opportunity. Her athletic ability wasn't really, she's not like, why can't mama run or anything like that. She never said that. But we talk about how, you know, her donor helpers had, you know, were good at sports and stuff like that. And that might be why she's so good at soccer and swimming and other things, you know, and it also might be because we practice and we do, it's like, we can't pinpoint things exactly, but if there's an opportunity and it feels good and it feels right, and it feels like your kids will gain from it, and you're not going to be a hot mess like talking about it, then great, it's an opportunity. If it doesn't feel right at this moment in time, you know, it looks like most people who are writing in have younger children, then don't say anything just yet. Wait until it marinates a bit, wait until you feel more comfortable. And this all shifts as kids age and as you become more solid in some of the pieces of the narrative and things like that.
And I think it's important too to just mention that, you know, even genetic parents of genetic children have so many differences between themselves and their children. I feel like I have very little in common with my son, but I'm more like my daughter, and that's okay too. And, you know, that's an okay thing to say, you know, because no matter what, no matter how children are raised, they're always going to have those moments where they feel very, very different from their parents. And that can be in full genetic situations as well.
This is great. There's so many great questions. I'm conscious of time, and I'm just going to stop being conscious of time, and we'll keep talking a little bit. It's just a little bit hard to fully organize questions in this way. Maybe we can think of something better, but there was a question about, where was it? Talking to a child, a biological child that then has a sibling who is donor conceived. And again, this could be a whole other probably webinar topic, but you know, sometimes in a home where there's one child who was, you know, made in the bedroom, then a second child would come along that's made, you know, with the help of the doctor or a donor helper. And I think it's trying to talk about it in these simple forms. You know, the narrative usually starts with, we wanted to expand our family, but we needed some help when it was time to have baby number 2. And so, you know, this is somebody that helped us. And that means that, you know, you don't have to really pull apart differences necessarily, you know, like I always think of that from the Royal Tenenbaums, where the dad's like, and this is our donor, this is our adopted daughter, Margot, right? It's like, you're never going to say that. Any child that comes into your family, whether they are from the moon or from a donor or adopted or, you know, or fully genetic or not, or whatever it is, like, this is your family. And if you really take that lens, then, you know, the difference is we, in this situation, we had a sperm donor helper, and that means there might be things that connect our child to this sperm donor or to this egg donor, or to this embryo donor, but we're all still family, and that's that, right? And so it's creating, there are more layers to it, but I think it's really working out, what are we afraid of as parents? What is the first step? What are we worried is going to happen? Oh, they're going to feel disconnected or this and that. Okay, well, let's work that out. And so I think that we'll address a lot of this in this next one. Like, now I'm getting ideas of how to shape this next conversation, because I think a lot of this is starting with our own fears of all of this. And listen, I'm a professional in the field, but I also had all of these things, and I still do have some of these things. Fears, being my daughter growing up and saying, you're not my real mom, or something like that. And I think I have said that to my husband at some point. And like, I know that it doesn't get any realer than me as her mom, but I also know that I don't share her genetics. And so that has some meaning too, that we're working through. But, sometimes it feels like, okay, there's going to be this big difference, like one child that's created this way and another child that's created this way. And then you meet a family, and I know families like this where one child's adopted and then another child got pregnant naturally, and then another child is donor conceived through embryo donation, and it just, when you talk about different families and how families come together and that idea of diversity, hopefully that helps to shape it and normalize it in a way. I don't know if I did a good job answering that question, but I tried. Okay, what?
Did you see the question about how do you find a therapist who is familiar with this topic? We kind of covered that in one of the resource slides, and we will be sending this recording out if you want to go back and look, but Maya, do you have kind of a quick answer to?
Yeah, that was that resource page. So the American Society for Reproductive Medicine, ASRM.org, I believe has like a thing where you click on, it says for patients, and then you can look up by state to find a licensed clinician by state. Hopefully that works. And Resolve as well. And Psychology Today. And, we're doing a lot of work in this, and hopefully we'll have a good resource list coming soon as we launch Moxie Education and things like that. So hopefully that makes sense, or that's helpful. Any input on how and when to arrange the first meeting with the genetic family? So I don't know, Jen, do you want to take that one? And I think it's like people, we have to just figure out what makes sense for everybody. I know, Jen, you talked about that a little bit more specifically. You donated to somebody that you didn't know, which is a bit different from Gina. But any input on that?
Yeah, I think, a lot of times those are great conversations to have before a donation occurs, although I know that isn't always the case. And in fact, when I chose my recipient, we didn't begin to talk about the exact sort of relationship we would have. But as we went on, we both sort of came to a point where we felt like, okay, we want to be able to, have a kind of closer relationship, even though you live across the country. And we had this beautiful opportunity, as I mentioned, to meet twice a year. So in terms of, when to arrange it, it really probably depends on the donor family and just talking with them and doing what feels best for both, because of course you're not going to be able to force a meeting unless both sides are ready. And some people like to start small with letters or even Zoom meetings as opposed to in-person meetings. Some people don't even have the opportunity to do in-person meetings because of distance and things like that. So yeah, just work it out, with the genetic family. But I think if you have the opportunity, I think the earlier the better. If you don't have that opportunity and some people need space or some time to wait, then just work together for it to happen. We've seen beautiful stories of people not meeting until they're teenagers, which we actually featured one of those stories on our blog. That was more in an unknown donation situation, but yeah, it can really be great at any age.
And I wanted to add that, I think it's important to accept the awkwardness in these relationships. Like, the fact is that nobody knows how to do this yet. We're all learning, and so I think accepting the awkwardness, it's going to be like a little awkward or bumpy or something at first, and that's normal. That's just like, because we don't have these relationships modeled for us, we don't have an idea of what they're supposed to look like or how, and I just think in most of the relationships in our lives, we have some kind of things that we can at least, understand them to be. And so I think we're going to have a long time where we're all just learning and figuring out that piece is like, what does a meeting with the genetic relatives mean? For us and my family, that's been true. And I think that, and even though we donated to a family member, like we had a whole other set of family members that had to get to know me for the first time and see what that would look like. So I think there's this piece of just awkwardness that we just all have to understand that it's going to be par for the course.
Yeah. And I just thought of one more quick thing to add. The way that we went about it is the very first time we met my recipient and her son, it was just my husband and I. So that was really important for us to process that feeling first on our own without our own children being with us. And then the next time it was them, and then it was the 5 of us together. And then after that, we started meeting extended family. Like I've met my recipient's parents and an aunt, and they've met my parents and my grandparents. So that was a nice way for us to kind of ease our way into these meetings, because like Gina said, it can be sometimes awkward. And I personally didn't know how it would feel to meet them for the first time. And I really needed to do that alone with my husband, as opposed to also manage like my own children and their feelings in the moment.
And I think that'll be the last webinar, is really the decision to donate and then the donor experience through the process and things like that. So we have 2 more webinars coming up that I think we can hit some of these questions in a little more depth. There was another question about broaching a conversation with older kids. So I hope that I touched on that a little bit. I do think it's really helpful to have a mental health support that can help navigate this with older kids, or just with the parents first, and figure it out, especially when there are complications or divorce and step parents and different dynamics that come to play. But, you know, first and foremost is understanding that, you know, sometimes people will realize, oh, we donated embryos, but we never really told our children about IVF, or we donated embryos and we never really talked about that those embryos were created with the help of an egg donor or something like that. So there may be these, you know, things to pull back and kind of looking at your unique family composition and situation, and figure out, okay, where do we start with the conversation, and not overcomplicating it. You know, it's not like this is simple in any way, shape, or form, but there are steps to it, and there are reasons you either shared or didn't share. And, you know, with older kids, you got to be prepared to have some of these perhaps more challenging conversations. You also might be pleasantly surprised that sometimes kids will feel like, oh, okay, that makes sense, or, you know, you just don't know. But practicing this a little bit, trying to be on the same page, and if there are specific things that your specific family needs help navigating, whether that's this idea of, you know, because of our culture or some reason we can't tell, we really don't want the extended family to know, but we want our child to know, you know, getting into some of the details of what specifically it is for you is really helpful to do in a one-on-one situation with the therapist in your area. So anyways, Jen, just quickly answer, how do you refer to your donated embryo?
We just refer to him by his first name. In fact, we still call him, we say baby, and then I don't want to say his name, but we call him baby and then say his name, which is funny because he's 4 now, and eventually we'll just start calling him by name. And then we just refer to his mother by her first name.
Yeah. So I don't know, is there anything that, you know, there are some real good questions in here. How would you handle children wanting to seek out the donor if the donor is unknown? Again, probably a topic that can be a full plus hour, and one that I'm very connected to. You know, it's, how do you start to navigate this? 23andMe exists. What does your original contract, you know, there have been different like legal cases that have come up. So it is a bit complicated. I will say that as parents, and for me as a parent of an unknown, you know, embryo donation, I will go to the end of the earth to do what I feel is right for my kid. And so that might look really different for different people. You do want to check legalities. You do want to, you know, sort of like really look at the logistics of all of it. But at the same time, I think we're seeing that we are just becoming a more connected world. And we talked a little bit about the end of anonymity. And I think it was the first webinar, where we're really seeing a shift right now. And in this shift is this opportunity to have these more open conversations and these more open relationships. But we're in the middle of this wobble, as we say sometimes, right? Is that, you know, it's a little complicated, and it's just figuring out what makes sense for everybody. And again, working with somebody who is versed in these specific issues could be really helpful. What else? Is that good? I mean, we're at 2 hours now, so I feel like we should let people have their Saturday.
I think if there are questions that have been unaddressed that you really want us to answer, feel free to email us at hello@empowerdonation.com. Also, if you could fill out our feedback survey that you'll get as an email after to follow the webinar, we'd really love your input. We do want to hear how you feel about the topics we're talking about, how you've been supported, or how we could do better, what things that you want to be addressed. So please, please, please fill out our survey if you have a chance. It shouldn't take any longer than about 5 minutes.
And thank you for spending your Saturday morning with us. We know that, there are other places to be, but we hope that this was helpful. So take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.